Okay. So welcome everyone to the first of three. Um, and Shelby, if you could just keep admitting folks, that would be great. The first of three training series this month on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. This is the first one. We're just calling it the basics. So if you are a complete newbie to what state revolving funds are, you are in the right place. Or if you feel like you have a little bit of knowledge but are hoping to get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty, this will be a good launch pad, and we will be going into some more details in the next two sessions coming up um, throughout this month. Sorry, I'm on a little delay there. All right, and as I mentioned, if you could please introduce yourself in the chat, we would love to see who all is in the room. And if you could also put your questions as we go through the presentation today into the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll be um, going back through those during the Q&A and discussion portion of this session. Um, and we will ask you to fill out a short survey at the end to help us improve. So we always appreciate when folks give us feedback. And there's me. Okay, my name is Erin Kanzig. I'm the Drinking Water Program Director at River Network. I'm flying solo today as your guide into understanding the basics of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. I'm based in Detroit, Michigan on Anishinaabe land. River Network is a national nonprofit. Our mission is to connect and strengthen the national network of water justice and river advocates who work for water at the community, local, state, and regional levels. River Network is one of four co-conveners of the SRF State Advocates Forum, along with three other exceptional organizations. We've got folks, I think, from all three here today as well. Alliance for the Great Lakes, PolicyLink, and the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, also often called EPIC. We create opportunities for advocates to learn, like this three-part Clean Water SRF series, share lessons, and synergize across geographies and levels of government to pursue more equitable and climate resilient infrastructure investments. You're welcome to join the forum by going to the link that Shelby will drop in the chat. We have an online platform that folks communicate with, share resources on, and we also have a great website, srfadvocatesforum.org. It has a whole bunch of other resources, including fact sheets, recordings of our calls from the past over 2 years now, along with a database on other SRF resources. So although this session today is just really a short preview of the Clean Water SRF, there's a whole bunch of other information on there that I encourage you to check out. So here's the overarching agenda for today's call. This is the first of three sessions, and today we're really just covering the basics regarding what the Clean Water State Revolving Fund is, what it can pay for, who can access funding, and we'll also touch briefly on how this ties into the Justice 40 initiative with regards to each state's affordability criteria. Go over the specific pot of money that's dedicated through the bipartisan infrastructure law for PFAS and other emerging contaminants. And then we'll open the space up for Q&A and discussion. But before you listen to me talk on for a chunk of time, I want to pause and just get a sense of what you all think of when you hear about clean water infrastructure projects. So we're asking you to use menti.com. So if you type in menti.com into your web browser and use this code 26509269, you should be able to contribute to that response. And I think, are you all seeing it here now? Shelby, do you see the Menti thing pulled up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. You can submit more than one response to, I think you can submit up to 3. So if you have more than one idea. Um, and we're just gonna wait a few more minutes. When you think of clean water infrastructure projects, what comes to your mind? All right, it's moving. And sorry for the green on green here. That's not a great accessibility feature on Mentimeter's part. So sorry if some of those are hard to read. Um, but I'm seeing a whole slew of different responses. Some folks are writing flooding management, drinking water, education, mitigating runoff of wastewater, wetland restoration, replacing pipes, green infrastructure, water utility upgrades. You all have a lot of ideas, and that makes sense because there are, in fact, a whole bunch of different things that can be funded through the Clean Water SRF to improve a whole bunch of different types of infrastructure projects. Community wealth building, CAFO regulation, sanitary sewer, gray and green infrastructure, riparian protection, equity, connectivity. Oh, I don't know what LTCP is. If anyone wants to put that in the chat. Um, impaired waters, better source water. Okay, you all have this under control. So that's great. Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to our presentation here. Thank you for those responses. So I really appreciate seeing all those different ideas. And yeah, it's true. There's a lot to think about when we think about water infrastructure. So as you may know, there are 2 state revolving fund programs. One is the Drinking Water SRF and the other is the Clean Water SRF. These 2 programs are really the basis of how how federal funding supports our country's water infrastructure needs. And water infrastructure includes centralized infrastructure that collects, treats, and distributes water and wastewater, like treatment plants, pipes, and detention ponds, as well as distributed infrastructure that can occur across a community or a utility service area, like smart meters, leak detection devices, and rain catchment infrastructure, among the many others examples that you all provided. So with that being said, I'm going to be going over a little bit more about what exactly the Clean Water SRF can do to fund water infrastructure needs in your community. The Clean Water SRF was created in 1987 through amendments to the Clean Water Act, and it replaced a construction grant program. It directs funding to projects for wastewater and stormwater infrastructure projects, and states operate their clean water SRF programs primarily using low interest revolving loans with revenue from loan repayments available to continue financing projects in the future. So that's what they mean when they say revolving loan. Um, it's going to be repaid back into the infrastructure bank that is operated at the state level so that these funds can continue to invest into the future. Um, and as I mentioned, it was established in 1987. It's over 35 years old. So why does it seem like everyone's suddenly paying attention to it now? In 2021, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, sometimes called Bill, sometimes also called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA, established a historic amount of funding for both state revolving fund programs. On the clean water side, we're seeing an investment of $11.7 billion between 2022 and 2026, an additional $1 billion for projects that specifically address emerging contaminants. The bipartisan infrastructure law supplemental funding also put some additional parameters on how this money can be spent. So 49% of the supplemental funding must be used as principal forgiveness. It's a loan or a portion of a loan that won't have to be paid back. And that percentage goes all the way up to 100% for the emerging contaminants funding. I circled it. There you go. So this is in addition to the annual appropriations process that we go through every year that is funding the general SRF programs. And then this money is being infused on top of that. And as I said at the top of this call, somehow it's already 2024. So that period of this money going out the door, we're already halfway into it. And it's really important for advocates to understand how these programs operate and ensure that they are getting funding to communities that need it most. I'm not going to go over all of these steps, but I did want to show this image to y'all. This is a bird's eye view of the SRF process. River Network, in collaboration with the Clean Water for All Coalition, published an SRF advocacy toolkit, and it includes a lot of different graphics, including this one, that are helpful in understanding how these complicated programs work. But you can see on the left that Congress, at the beginning of this process, appropriates funding that goes to EPA, and EPA is then distributing that to states, tribes, and territories using a couple of different needs assessments. The funding then goes to state programs, and then they each have their own process for coming up with how they are going to prioritize where their funds will go. Local entities then apply, and then they go through a whole process of getting their projects prioritized at the state level, selected, and then the projects get implemented, and then the communities pay back any loan portion of their project costs back into their state's revolving fund. So this just shows at a very high level, and I'll note that also some of these steps aren't necessarily sequential, but might be happening at the same time. So who can apply for clean water SRF funds? This gets a little tricky again because each state operates their program a little differently. But generally speaking, municipalities, intermunicipal, interstate, and state agencies can apply. In some cases, nonprofit entities may apply for funding. Some states allow private for-profit entities to apply, but that's not the case everywhere. And then watershed groups, community groups, and even individuals are able to apply in some cases for different projects. There are 11 categories of eligible projects for clean water SRF assistance. The first is construction of publicly owned treatment works. This includes devices and systems used to store, treat, recycle, and reclaim municipal sewage. The second one is non-point source pollution control. So traditionally, most clean water SRF funding has gone to point source projects, but some creative states are also using it as a vital source of funding to address non-point source pollution. So for example, in Georgia, the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority finances land conservation projects to protect water quality and reduce the risk of flooding through their Georgia Land Conservation Program. And I'll note that EPA has a best practices guide for financing non-point source solutions that has a bunch of other excellent examples if that's of something that you're interested in, or if your organization works on non-point source pollution issues. The third one that folks can apply for is for National Estuary Program projects. I don't know a whole bunch about National Estuary Program in general, so I can't give you a whole bunch of other information on that, but if you are involved in any of those programs, that is also eligible for funding through the Clean Water SRF. Decentralized wastewater treatment systems are also eligible. States can make businesses, community groups, farmers, conservation districts, nonprofits, and even individual homeowners eligible for funding for decentralized projects, including through linked deposit programs for private homeowners to replace their septic systems, which are very costly to replace. With your own personal financing. Stormwater management includes projects that manage, reduce, treat, or recapture municipal stormwater or subsurface drainage water, and that can include both gray and green infrastructure. An example that's often brought up is in Camden City, New Jersey. They constructed rain gardens to reduce stormwater flow. They converted impervious surfaces into a park, and also separated parts of the city's combined sewer system to reduce stormwater flooding. We'll be talking a lot more about this type of project in more detail in the next session on January 17th with American Rivers guest speakers. I'm sorry to be just talking through these so quickly, but here we go. We're on number 6. Water conservation, efficiency, and reuse is another project type that can be funded. As an example, in Tennessee, the state's Department of Environment and Conservation aims to use SRF funding to implement a training program for communities, utilities, and commissions about how to reduce system water loss and develop mitigation actions. Excuse me, watershed pilot projects. These are projects that must meet the criteria in the Clean Water Act, Section 122, which can include managing municipal combined sewer overflows, sanitary sewer overflows, and stormwater discharges through watershed management, and also implementing stormwater best management practices and reducing water quality impairments. Public and private entities are eligible to apply for these watershed pilot projects. Energy efficiency is another important thing that is eligible for funding through the Clean Water SRF. This category includes projects that reduce the energy consumption needs of publicly owned treatment works. Several communities have used these funds to make their treatment systems more efficient and saving energy costs each year. Number 9 is water reuse. I don't talk this much usually in one go, so I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of a sore throat here. An example of water reuse in a small town in Arizona, they installed new booster pumps to send reclaimed water to maintain the city's stadium, ball playing fields, green belts, and landscaping. And they were able to reduce the amount of groundwater they pumped out each year by a significant amount. The these last two are security measures at publicly owned treatment work. So we think about the increasing risk of cybersecurity attacks on water utilities. This funding can help make them more secure, secure more network backups, providing backup power generation, and installing threat detection systems. And finally, number 11 is around technical assistance. So utilities are able to access support for asset management and improving operational and managerial capacity through some TA support. All right, that was the longest slide ever. Sorry. Lots of projects can be funded. And then I just briefly want to touch on this new $1 billion pot of funding through bill for PFAS. If you're not familiar with what PFAS are, I hate to break it to you, but they're everywhere. They are often known as forever chemicals. They're pervasive in our environment, including in our drinking water and wastewater. So this $1 billion in funding is going to be distributed entirely as principal forgiveness or grants. The bipartisan infrastructure law marks the first time Congress has directed funding to address emerging contaminants as an eligible clean water SRF activity. Um, and a few of the ways in which communities might go ahead and use this funding, take advantages of this funding, is to install technology at wastewater treatment plants to treat PFAS. If they're not sure if they have a problem, they can also install sampling equipment and containment systems to identify if it's an issue. And they can also install advanced treatment. So, reverse osmosis and granulated activated carbon are effective ways of removing PFAS from our water. And so, a bunch of communities are hopefully going to be taking advantage of this funding as it continues to go out the door. To give you an idea of how this funding is flowing, it's important to remember that each state operates their own SRF program differently, and how they are pushing this money out the door varies state by state. This is an example from Michigan, and again, sorry that this, if you try to look up SRF information in your state, you'll quickly familiarize yourself with a lot of tables that are very full of numbers and dense with information. But here you can see in this column over here, it says Bill, Emerging Contaminants, Principal Forgiveness. And in Michigan last year, they actually gave all of the year's funding for PFAS to one community, but they also gave other clean water SRF funding to different projects to address PFAS, but it wasn't necessarily through this pot of money that is going to be entirely forgiven. Other states are divvying it up in a different manner so that multiple projects would be getting some of this principal forgiveness funding. Um, and this project priority list also might exist in some states just for emerging contaminants, where you can see more easily the number of communities receiving funding. The Clean Water SRF programs are required through the Clean Water Act to use affordability criteria to identify economically disadvantaged municipalities based on income data, unemployment, and population trends. You have perhaps heard the term disadvantaged communities rise in popularity as the Justice 40 initiative has rolled out. Um, and actually, disadvantaged communities, or DACs, is a technical term that is specifically used in the drinking water SRF program space, and not necessarily in the clean water SRF program space. So you'll hear about affordability criteria when we're talking about clean water SRFs. Many states rely on median household income and unemployment rates at the county or state level, along with population trend thresholds, to determine their affordability criteria. However, they can have discretion to include other data to make this more robust. This could include an opportunity for states to consider affordability or information that could impact affordability, like health, education, and other factors that may contribute to social vulnerability. And a lot of advocates in the past several years have been encouraging their states to improve what factors they use to calculate affordability criteria. The image on the right is from Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality. They describe how they use affordability criteria designations to apply that principal forgiveness allocation. So if you are a community that falls under their definition of affordability criteria, of meeting that affordability criteria, you are going to be likely receiving at least some amount of principal forgiveness. And you can see here that DEQ puts a cap on that. They say that they will give an award of up to $500,000 in principal forgiveness per project, or 50% of the loan for a distressed community. So even if you're a community that is experiencing a lot of economic hardship, you will likely still have to be fronting 50% of a project cost through a low interest loan. This is, again, another thing that varies state by state. And I see that there's a lot of things in the chat, but I can't see right now. So just rest assured that I will be stopping soon to open it up for questions and answers. Here is another image that we have in our SRF advocacy toolkit around key roles that the federal, state, and local governments play, as well as the role of advocates in terms of who is involved in shaping how the Clean Water SRF program functions. For advocates at the federal level, and these are just very high-level generic points of engagement. And again, the third training series of this Clean Water SRF training series happening on the 31st is going to be focused entirely on advocacy and advocacy planning. So we'll be going into a lot more detail in that one. But just to get your wheels turning a little bit around points of engagement at the federal level, we're encouraging advocates to be communicating with EPA regional and headquarters staff about your state's SRF process and improvements you want to see. At the state level, it's really important to establish relationships with your SRF state program staff, to reach out to them with questions, to understand the specific process that's going to be occurring in your state. Your SRF state staff develop what's called an intended use plan, or IUP, and they release a draft of that every year. That's kind of a blueprint of how they are going to be spending their SRF dollars that year. There's an opportunity for the public to submit comments on that draft IUP, and that's been really a critical way in which we've seen advocates submit formal comments through that period and continue to have ongoing relationships with their SRF program staff. And then at the local level, obviously everyone has different types of relationships or no relationship with their water utility or wastewater utility. And so recognizing that you might be starting at different points, it is, of course, a good idea if you're working at the local level to be in communication with your utility on how they're thinking about investing in water infrastructure needs in the coming years, and if the Clean Water SRF seems like a viable option for them to pursue. I am going to be pausing here to open it up for Q&A and discussion. These two images here are also pulled from our advocacy toolkit. Again, just to give you some examples of the ways in which you can begin to think about how your work that you're already doing might overlap with state revolving funds. We recognize that this is kind of a niche program, and it can take a lot of energy to begin to understand what the program is all about, and if it's worth your time and effort to get involved, maybe potentially to apply for funding if you're eligible. But there are a list of questions here around ways in which your goals might already overlap with state revolving fund related work. And the image on the left here is just a sort of a shortcut guide to who to talk about different issues as you work on your SRF advocacy. I'm going to pause there, and Shelby, if you have questions queued up, you can feel free to start digging into those, and otherwise I'm happy for y'all to use the raise your hand feature or come off mute to ask questions. And I'm going to ask my wonderful forum co-conveners to help answering these questions. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, there's a couple questions. Christopher's responded to a couple of them in the chat. But one question just generally was that, are you going to cover cross-collateralization in this training or following?
I am not going to cover that here, and we'd be happy to follow up with additional resources. And I will just say with full transparency here, you all, I was like, I'll cover the basics of the clean water SRF training because that's about all I know. For a lot of us, we have been really like learning as we dig into this. And so there are questions that I do not know the answer to, but I'm happy to help connect you with other folks that do know those answers or do have access to those resources. And the guest speakers next week talking about green stormwater infrastructure and then also advocacy planning have been doing this work a lot longer than I have. So again, apologies in advance if I don't provide you with a lot of detail here.
And then there was a note question about DC and Puerto Rico not being on the map on one of your slides.
Oh, okay. So that image of the map is from a report from American Rivers on private lending. And Puerto Rico should be included, and I don't know why it is not. But I did not create the map, but good point.
Paul also asked if non-structural wastewater is eligible, and there's been a couple of responses in the chat about the eligibility as well as like some resources, but if you have anything to add there, Erin.
I would say, if I may, just generally, it can be things like planning projects. Those sorts of projects we understand are eligible for clean water funding. That's sort of what I just said.
Paul, do you want to elaborate on like what, if you have a specific type of project in mind that you're curious about?
Yeah, I mean, you know, green infrastructure is certainly part of the mix, but there might be other types of things that aren't really covered under the gray-green continuum, and the planning piece is also important, and I had forgotten about that. So, you know, I think this is something to explore off this training. It's probably a 201 or a 301 topic, like cross collateralization is. So, and I wanted to thank whoever posted the manual on cross collateralization in the chat, and I'll go back and take a look at that. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Paul. Yeah, there are a lot of other different types of projects that can get funded. So for example, like agricultural best management practices can get funded through the Clean Water SRF. Different like forestry restoration, silviculture projects can get funded. So the link that Sapna put in the chat around eligibility will go into more detail. EPA has developed a lot of different resources around like the nitty gritty of like all the different ways in which you might be able to tap into the Clean Water SRF fund for a certain project.
You know, I was thinking just one that came up, I'm sorry to interrupt, would be things like using oysters for which they do in Cape Cod and one or two communities for mitigation of wastewater and cleaning up the bays and estuaries, just as an example.
Thanks, Paul. Jennifer, I saw your hand up and then it went away. Do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, could it be used for existing projects that are already like underway? Or, okay, just wanted to make sure I was understanding that. Thank you.
We also have a question in the chat. Curious if you know if there are other non-point source pollution projects in other states using clean water SRF funds other than the land conservation in Georgia.
I would say the short answer is definitely yes, other states are doing it. If anyone else wants to jump in with another example off the top of their head, please do. But certainly, that has been non-point source projects have been rather underutilized through the Clean Water SRF, but it is an eligibility that states can promote. Chris, I don't know if you have another one, or Sapna.
I just included a link for a report from the EPA on best practices guide for financing non-point source solutions. It also includes some examples.
All right, I don't want to continue to talk at you if you have more questions, but if you don't, I wanted to just briefly share that coming up. Oh, was there just one? Oh, there's a thank you in the chat. Okay, coming up, we do have 2 more sessions. The first one is, or the second one is going to be on green and natural infrastructure and climate resilience projects. Same time on a Wednesday, 2 weeks from now. We will drop the registration link for that if you haven't already registered in the chat. And then the third and final one is around advocacy opportunities and planning. And that one will be on Wednesday, January 31st. So please, if those 2 topics are in particular interest to you, join us for those as well. And then to inform those upcoming sessions also, and again, recognizing that this was kind of an information dump, and I'm excited that the next 2 sessions will have some more interaction. We'd love to hear what you're most eager to learn about in the next 2 sessions related to those topics so that we can tailor them to the best of our ability to your needs and interests. So if you can go back to that menti.com and use this code. I believe Shelby will put it in the chat again as well, or you might already have it pulled up. It will be the second slide, or the second question on there. And if you are over trying to open up Menti, you can also just drop your ideas in the chat and we will capture them that way too. I also want to plug that we'll be sharing all of these slides with you all afterwards. And we've included a bunch of links on this slide that will be helpful to further build your knowledge on the Clean Water SRF. And I will add the few other links that were included just now during the Q&A to this, so you all have access to that in one place. And I think that Shelby will also be dropping a link to our evaluation. We would appreciate you taking the time to fill that out. And again, we'll be putting all 3 Clean Water SRF training sessions up on the SRF Advocates Forum website.